If you ever see this test mode watermark show up at the bottom right of your Windows desktop, that is extremely bad. You may have actually been hacked. But why? What is this Windows test mode anyway, and why is it bad? Well, I'm gonna explain that. I'm TheoJoe, and let's get into it. And I am curious what you would have done if you saw that show up and you hadn't seen this video, so you can let everyone know down in the comments. So the first thing to understand is this test mode in Windows is not inherently bad, assuming you enabled it yourself and you know why you were enabling it and for a good reason. For 99.999% of people, though, you should not have this enabled. And that's because it's intended for developers specifically working on hardware drivers. I will elaborate on that more in a second, but one thing to understand is it's not really easy to accidentally enable this test mode. You would have had to specifically do it, though you could theoretically be tricked into it. There's really only two ways it would be done. One is through the advanced boot menu, so that's through like the recovery options, and then there's a specific option called disable driver signature enforcement, and I believe though that would only do it for that one next session. And do not do this, by the way, though I'll explain why later. But the other way to do it would be through a certain command prompt command, and that would persist it. There is another caveat, however, and that is for this mode to be enabled, you have to disable secure boot in the BIOS. Now, for most people, you will have secure boot on by default if you bought a pre-built computer, although if you built your own computer, maybe you didn't think to enable it, but you really should have it enabled. It is greatly increasing the security of your computer. Anyway, you're probably wondering, what exactly does this test mode actually do? And put simply, it allows you to run unsigned drivers in Windows. And this has been the case where Windows requires signed drivers ever since Windows 10. Now, to understand the implications of what that actually means, there's some extra context you need, like what is signing, why is driver signing special, and stuff like that. So signing is basically where you go to a certificate authority. These are companies that are trusted, and you pay them to verify your credentials and your identity or your company's identity, and they issue you a cryptographic key that you can use to sign software and sign files that basically proves that that program came from a specific company or person. And because it takes so much verification and identity verification that it's very rare that malware ever is signed, because presumably that means that it could be definitely tied back to a real person who could then just be put in jail unless it was a stolen key or something like that. Signed malware is rare, but it is possible. I actually came across some myself one time. I made a tweet about it, so it does happen. However, it's not required that software be signed to run on Windows, though it will usually show you a bit of an extra warning if it's not signed. Now, when it comes to drivers, that's a different story. Drivers have low-level hardware access, so they inherently have to have very, very permissive permissions with the Windows operating system. So they can do a lot more stuff. I mean, even accessing the physical stuff your computer is made of. So they actually require extra special signing in Windows. So much so that you can't actually run unsigned drivers at all without going into this special test mode. That's the point of it. It lets you run unsigned hardware drivers. Now, why should this mode exist at all? And that's because if you're creating a driver as a developer and you want to do some testing, maybe you don't want to have to sign it every single time just to make one little change and test it. And also, signed drivers, because it's a special type of signing that Microsoft has to also sign off on, I believe, it takes longer. So it definitely wouldn't be practical if you want to make one tiny little change, see if it does anything, and then ship it off to Microsoft to have them verify it and go through all this stuff and wait who knows how long just to see if a bug fix works. No, you want to be able to test it right away, and you would do that in this mode. And then once you have everything all sorted out, you're like, okay, this is the final version of this driver. That's when you would sign it yourself and then have Microsoft sign it. I'm not 100% certain. I've never had to do it myself, but I know it's a special type of certificate you can't just usually get as if you would with software signing certificates. Now, as for why it would be bad news to see this watermark show up in Windows, that's because, well, we already talked about how running it in test mode allows unsigned, unverified software that therefore can say it's a driver and access pretty much anything on the system. It basically gets ring zero access if it wanted, which is like the most permissive level of permissions, well, that means you can basically run anything. And if there was some malware that wanted the maximum permissions to do literally whatever it wanted on your computer, it would pretend to be a driver and it would not be signed. But there's another reason it could be bad, even if it's just for a driver that, you know, isn't malicious in itself, but maybe it's just some kind of DIY hardware device that isn't signed. It requires you to run it with this mode. Well, that would still mean that it hasn't gone through any kind of validation from Microsoft, where they do all sorts of automated testing, and for certain drivers they do even more rigorous testing. So that could be unstable, and because drivers run at the kernel level, well, it's not just going to crash the program, it's going to crash your entire operating system with a blue screen of death. So that's something to be at least aware of. Anyway, the point is, most people should not have that enabled, and if you don't know what test mode is, or you don't remember enabling that specifically, you may have actually been tricked into enabling it. That probably would be hard if you had Secure Boot enabled again, but theoretically they could have somehow tricked you into manually going and enabling Secure Boot. Like if you downloaded something that said it was a game cheat and you had to disable Secure Boot to do it, well, that might actually be a virus. Although, again, if you did not have Secure Boot enabled, then theoretically the virus that had admin level permissions, which again is a step above user level. Like it would already have to get admin, which is pretty bad, but that theoretically could then change the boot options to also run as kernel level drivers, which would just be disastrous. Now, to be clear, even a virus at the user level can wreak a lot of havoc. I mean, these days with even so much information just being stored in your browser and your user profile, even user level malware is really bad. But I mean, it's just another level as admin, and then just insane if it was able to get kernel level drivers, but theoretically it could be out there. And I would theorize that most malware out there would not be developed specifically requiring it to be run as a driver. It probably would just try to run and do whatever it can at the permission level it has, but it might test to see if it can get as admin or as a driver permission, and then if it can, it'll still do it. So that's why you still don't want to just run in test mode all the time. If you do find yourself at some point with test mode enabled, maybe you enabled it, you know you did yourself, but forgot how to disable it, it's pretty simple. You just use this command, bcdedit/set test signing off, and that should do it. Though again, if you don't remember enabling it, that is probably something to be concerned about. And then after restarting, it should be off. If it doesn't work or it gives some kind of error, there's articles I'm sure you can find that might have other stuff you can try. And also, I would try to enable Secure Boot. That is a little bit more involved. You have to do that through the BIOS, so that's beyond the scope of this video. You could find articles or videos on how to do that, but it's at least something to look into. And the curious thing is, if you do any kind of search about what is Windows test mode, a lot of the results talk about, oh, how to get rid of the test mode watermark and stuff like that, which is pretty like amateur level articles. I mean, if you don't even know what test mode is, where you're talking about just removing the watermark as if you're not trying to disable the mode entirely, I mean, that implies that there's people out there who never enabled it themselves, or else you would really have to know what it is to even get it enabled. So that is kind of scary. So if you don't know what it is and you see that, I would probably just like reformat Windows, because you don't even know what level it got to. I would not trust the computer probably. So really, you do you. Or if you were just curious and you never heard of it before, that's even more knowledge that you have now. Again, I would be curious if you had ever seen this before, and if not, what would you have done if you hadn't seen this video and saw it show up? We could talk about that down in the comments. Of course, if you enjoyed the video and thought it was helpful, be sure to give it a big giant thumbs up. Absolutely annihilate the like button into oblivion. It helps out. And if you want to keep watching, next up, here's a video where I talked about a relatively new Windows feature that you should probably enable before it's too late. It'll actually help with potentially some recovery and boot failure issues. So I'll put that link right there you can click on. And if you want to subscribe, I try to make videos about twice a week, so it should be worth it. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.